Wow, Tony, thank you so much. That was incredible. And what a way to bring us in to today's session, to our last session of this 14-hour day. It has been really incredible um, to just see all of us coming together in this global community. A warm welcome to you all, to us all, to this moment. I see people typing into the chat their hellos and where they are. A warm welcome to those of you who have been with us before for the last 7 weeks that we've been on this GAIA journey, and a warm welcome to those of you who may be joining for the first time. It is wonderful to have us all together in this way, weaving together 4 different Zoom rooms. In at least channel 1, there's 118 in this room, and we're weaving together the other Zoom rooms, and we'll share how many of us are here as we go forward. And we also have our live stream to YouTube. So welcome to all of you, wherever you are, whatever platform you may be joining us on. It is wonderful to be here together. We have been on this GAIA journey for 7 weeks and have been bringing together various different groups of us who are hoping to see a better world, and seeing this moment of what for many of us is a crisis, for all of us is a pandemic. It's a shift in our world that is unprecedented. And we've been coming together week after week, both in our inhale sessions, to connect with each other and to cross-pollinate and learn from one another, to feel into and sense what is going on in our world, in our own lives, in our own being. And as we do that, we also begin to see and sense what's going on as a collective. So we'll walk us through a little bit of the journey of what we've been on and where we're going, so we can check out the slides. There's a first slide which will show us the inhale. And the inhale is really where we, as I said, drop into this kind of cross-pollination and this sensing into what's emerging within each of us and within all of us. And the next slide shows us our journey together. So if you just focus on the blue squiggly line that moves through all the dates and the circles, many of you have joined us since March 27th, where we came together and really just sensed into what was happening. And what we sat with, one of the participants shared with us that everything I have gone through in my life has prepared me for this moment. And it was such a profound feeling for many of us. We also moved through this experience together in the next one, saying what we knew was not sustainable, the actions, the way that we were moving forward, is now collapsing. And what Otto has shared with us, when systems fail, people rise. So what we've been looking for throughout this experience is being able to tap into our own sense of agency, our own awareness that we have a choice, we have an ability to step into and be activated around a new intention, around a new possibility. So in that sadness and grief that many of us may be sitting with, we know that there's also a moment of possibility. And we had said towards the beginning, while one world is ending, another is being born. And if we stay on that slide just for a little longer, we know that where we are in this journey, we've kind of gone through this early part where we're staying with deep listening and dialogue. And now we did that for the first few weeks, and now we are moving into this place of deep resonance, where we are really just kind of we've done that listening in, and now we're beginning to sense what's actually here. And this is where we can begin to activate the open heart, heal through all different forms and modalities, methods, and tools, many of which have been developed by the Presencing Institute over decades. And where we continue to move through is moving into action, but based on what we're called to move into, not what only we're just, here's something that I have an idea of in my mind. We start to sense into what's actually emerging for us. So as we move into that place of what we'll call vertical social prototyping in a few weeks, we sit with this space of deep resonance. And we sit with this space of listening to what has come before. We had Vandana Shiva here, who spoke with us around the commons and our food systems, but she also shared that the new colonization is the colonization of the mind. And that is really what we are beginning to deconstruct. And we had Dana Cunningham with us, who shared that structural violence is a set of human agreements, and that we can move from structural violence to structural love. And we had the elders and Aboriginal leaders from the Noongar community who shared, Noel shared that we each have our piece of the path to tend to. He said it's a piece of the path that is to the future that's ours. And that's what we need to tend to in order to see where that pathway is going. So we heard all of those beautiful things. And what we sit with is the and how. How do we move forward? And what we started to sense into in our last inhale was, what is the micro change inside of you, inside of each of us? What is coming into being and what is already there? So today's inhale, we've had 5 incredible sessions throughout the day. We started with Thomas Hubel at 10 a.m. Eastern. And we really began to look at what is the collective trauma that we have experienced, that we've been born into, and how can we integrate the fragmented parts of us and find wholeness as individuals and as a collective. And we sat with Nipun Mehta, who helped us open to our hearts and open to a place of compassion. We had a track in Spanish and in Portuguese today, and some beautiful quotes that I'll share in English, but know that they came in other tongues to us. That being human means listening to the pain of one's own song. And what you like and don't, they both hold a marvelous secret to one's freedom. And that was from Alejandro Corks, the Uruguayan author of 13 Questions About Love. Today, and we also had a Portuguese session that had very incredible speakers as well. This evening or morning, wherever you are, we are joined by Jon Kabat-Zinn, who we will introduce in just a little while, and we will dive into healing through the modalities that he has brought to us as a global community on a myriad of levels. But right now, I will send it over to Otto to continue the framing of our journey.
Thank you, Antoinette, and a very warm welcome also here from the Boston area. Before we move into our first contemplative practice at the opening, I want to share 1 or 2 remarks on method and methodology. Since that's really the grounding base on which we try to operate. And what you see here is a framework that we refer to as awareness-based systems change. And as all approaches to systems thinking, they start with a very simple distinction that you can see, in this iceberg model here, depicted as a distinction between symptoms at the top, right, what we see above the waterline, and root issues in this less visible realm below the waterline. And these 3 words, structures, paradigms of thought, and source, in a nutshell, depict the evolution of systems thinking over the past half century, where over the past decade or two, we have seen a progression from these first two structures and paradigms of thought to this deeper level here. Source of what? Source of our attention, source of our intention, source of our actions, source of our creativity, source of who we are. Another word, instead of source, could have been awareness. And I remember, many years back when I met Jon for the first time, and he was so kind to grant me an interview. So my first question was, what is meditation? Can you tell me, what actually is meditation? And the first sentence with which you responded, Jon, was meditation is about paying attention. So when I heard that, I thought, wow, I thought that's what leadership is all about. And that has to do with this fourth level here. So this fourth level really is about awareness, is about paying attention to our attention, is about becoming aware of our process of becoming aware. So awareness-based systems change, this kind of process or this version of systems thinking can be summarized with the following three sentences. One, you cannot understand a system unless you change it. That famously, was said by Kurt Lewin, the founder of Action Research. Two, you cannot change a system unless you transform consciousness. So that sentence probably summarizes my past 25 years of experience and, many experiences of other people, change makers that I have studied. And it basically says, okay, real systems change needs to include all four of these levels, right? It's not enough to just react against the symptoms atop here. It's not enough just to tinker with structures or to talk about mental models. What we really need is an approach that includes all four of these levels. So if we just assume for a moment that is actually the case, right? So you cannot change the system unless you pay attention to your attention. Then the question is, the shift of consciousness, how does that actually work? And that leads to the last one. You cannot transform consciousness unless you make a system see and sense itself. Now, all traditional ways of systems thinking, they would have said, you cannot transform consciousness unless you make a system see itself, right? You have lots of great methods and tools that help you to look into the mirror on the level of the collective. But what we are saying is that state-of-the-art systems thinking must include systems sensing, must include the rehabilitation, the activation of all our senses, both on the level of the individual and on the level of the collective. And that's why the methods of embodied learning, both individually, collectively, why all the methods of deep social resonance matter so much. And that's why, in the last Inhale 2 weeks ago, Arana and Manish and Laura introduced you to social presencing theater, introduced you to a method where you embody kind of the deeper aspects of our experience that we experience in each moment. And so we embodied that, we were leaning into two different versions of that experience of that current moment. And what we call sculpture one is a version where we connect with something that is about to end, or where we feel stuck, where something isn't moving. And then we embodied that, and we gave it, right? So each of us who did that gave it a name, kind of a phrase. And then from there, connecting deeper kind of with this sculpture one, we were able to drop deeper into it and follow it in terms of its dormant potential into something, right, that is moving into a different shape, which we called sculpture two, and which is more embodying the emerging future that maybe is wanting to happen. And we also capture that with a message, with a sentence. And then reflecting on the journey from one to two, we reflected on what was it actually that enabled me to make that shift. And in a few moments, we are going to, so each of you did that in the last Inhale session. We did it here in this session. And then also in the social solidarity circle, you practiced that a little more. And then a number of you sent your pictures and your sentences that you created for these pictures to us. And so we have a little kind of, Ricardo put together kind of a little compilation, a replay of that. We are going to show you that in a few moments, and then we'll have a little kind of moment of resonance and contemplation around that, okay? And it will follow this structure. So there's, sculpture one, where I lean into something that's ending. Sculpture two, where I lean into something, the deeper aspect of what is wanting to emerge, and then a little reflection on kind of what is the enabling conditions, kind of that allows me to connect with that movement, that deeper movement. So that's the what. And my last piece of setting this up is the how. How are we going to pay attention to this replay? And the instruction, the invitation is by paying attention with your mind and heart wide open. So the mind wide open means to suspend all habits of judgment and to really fully attend to what we are noticing, what we are seeing. And the heart wide open really means to sense, to feel into what we are, what we are seeing, what we are sensing. And this methodology kind of is really inspired much by the tradition of phenomenology. And one of the early originators of them is the German poet and phenomenologist Goethe, who claimed that every object well contemplated opens up a new organ of perception within us. So Goethe claimed every object well contemplated opens up a new organ of perception within us. In modern cognition science, we would say mind and world are not separate. So it's a level of attending to a situation where the distinction between the observer and the observed is collapsing. So that's the invitation here. In other words, the sculptures, kind of the images that we are going to see, and the sentences that the persons kind of on these images created for themselves to capture the essence of that experience. Yes, to some degree, they are a window into the soul of another person. But at the same time, they are also a window into our own soul. And possibly most importantly, they are a window into our collective soul. into our collective process of transition, of profound transformation that we all are in the midst of. So with that invitation, so that's the invitation. So not, just use that as like interesting information, but really engage with that material, which is our process, as a contemplative practice. So if you want to sit upright and comfortable, plant your feet firmly on the ground, and take a deep breath and relax. Move your attention down to the feet, feel the ground, feel the connection to earth. We are all touching the same earth. All 7, 8, or 900 of us. Each of us from a different place. Feel the connection downward. Feel the connection upward from your head. Feel your back, the back of your body. Notice your heart. Open your heart to all of us sitting together in this community, distributed across the entire planet. Even though most of us are North America, South America, Asia Pacific, Southeast Asia. And now open your heart in appreciation of those of us kind of who shared their own image, their own intimate process with the rest of us. And with that appreciation, Jon, I'm asking you to now play the video and invite all of us to engage. We'll see 14 or 15 of these sculptures. And from there, we'll stay a little bit in a moment of stillness and then go into a resonance process. Jon?
Chained. Surrender. Tiredness in the body. I grasp but cannot see. Free feet, grounded fly. Letting go. My hands are tired and I cannot move. It's okay. Let it come. Acceptance that you cannot just stay here. Anxiety, heavy burden, inability to move. Yes, yes, yes. Hope. I am exhausted. Release. Stop controlling things that cannot be controlled in the physical realm. I feel scared. I can't see the future. I am ready to move forward. Accepting this moment to notice what the future is asking from me. Tension, unstable. Peace, openness. Acceptance. I know. Reaching out. Daring courage. Letting go. Discouraged. No energy. Widely open. Hoping. Suffocation. What is beyond? Being reborn, a new seed wanting to emerge. I feel small. I meet you, not below, not above, but at eye level. Movement to the collective. Don't want to see. Available. Open up to others. I feel heaviness in my shoulders. I feel moving. I feel energy. Sensing patience. I am confused. I am connected. Self-knowledge.
Let's stay for another moment, just attend to the resonance that all these images evoke in us. And now we are going to move a little bit into the sharing of the resonance in 4 steps. At each steps, I will ask you a question, and then you are invited to share your response by writing into the chat, or if you prefer, you can also write into your journal. And then we'll read what emerges from the chat, a few of these lines out and back to you, so that we have a sense of what others experience in terms of their resonance. Number 1, what resonated most with you in terms of the images we just saw, which is the movement from sculpture 1 to sculpture 2. So what resonated most with you in terms of the images we just saw, the movement from sculpture 1 to sculpture 2? Just write that into the chat at the bottom of your screen, or into your journal.
Constraint to openness. Opening up pain and possibility. Struggle into release. Expansion. Abundance of hope and collective sense. From trapped by past, present, to being in the moment, connected.
Number 2, how does what you just saw resonate with your own experience, with your own sculpture 1 to sculpture 2 experience? How does what you just saw resonate with your own sculpture 1 to sculpture 2 experience?
Completely 100%. A close fit. Connecting to something bigger than myself. We are swimming in the same wave, evolving slowly and soulfully towards movement.
How does your and your social solidarity circles experience resonate with the global situation? So how does kind of your own sculpture 1 to sculpture 2 and your experiences with that in your social solidarity circle resonate and relate to the global situation we are living in?
Reflection of common experiences. We are awakening. The world feels so clenched up, and yet there are new moments and spaces of connection. Constrained as in feeling powerless, and then recognizing our power. Finding identity and social connection in a new social order. From ego-centered to openness to the collective. In the collective, I've also seen waves, not just linear movement. I can feel the pain of others more.
Number 4, and lastly, what enabled you to make the shift? So when you go back to your own actual experience moving from sculpture 1 to sculpture 2, what was it that allowed you to follow that movement?
I trusted myself, risking letting go. Breath, space, and trust. Getting back to the body. Trusting in a deeper source. Moving from power over to power with. a deep pain, break down, and then rebuild, deep diving into me. Being given permission to shift.
Thank you so much. So I want to express my gratitude to all of you of co-witnessing and co-attending and co-holding and co-creating this, really leaning courageously and with an open heart into this practice. And we'll be following that thread, over the next few weeks, as you know. And I also want to express my special gratitude to those of you who send in their own images for us to share it with the rest of us. So that's something very intimate and personal. And yet it is also very universal, right? As many of you expressed. And I also want to acknowledge, Arana and her team for pioneering and inventing and co-creating this methodology, and Ricardo of putting together this video in a way that really allowed us to deepen our own process here. And with that, I now want to shift the conversation, or stay with the conversation actually, and invite you, Jon, into the conversation. And I'm so happy, and we are so privileged to have you here as part of our journey. There are so many reasons, but I just want to highlight two of them, so that make it such a happy moment for you to join us here this evening. And one is, the whole GAIA approach and all the work we do is really based on a fundamental assumption, right? And I indicated that with awareness-based systems change, that real deep systems transformation today really requires, a deeper approach to working with awareness, working with mindfulness, working with heartfulness. And that's something today that many people feel, and it's almost becoming mainstream, right? And when you really double click on that and ask, why is that actually? So why is it that so many people connect kind of with this deeper dimension of our own humanity and of systems change today? I think there is like two main factors that enable that. One is, of course, neuroscience and mindfulness and the Mind and Life Institute. And Jon, you have been part of that story, kind of that pioneering story. That's kind of one line of work. But the other one is impact, that we have seen powerful examples where mindfulness is applied to profound challenges in society, and thereby created an impact that other methodologies did not allow. And the first of that powerful examples, and still the foremost today, is MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, something you created and pioneered and co-pioneered, Jon, and you really paved the way for all of us, the millions of people who now engage in that work. We would not be here together if you hadn't really pioneered that work many years back, and in creating a methodology that now is distributed and used in communities in hundreds and thousands of hospitals across the planet. So I really want to acknowledge you for what you have been doing, because without that, we will not be together here tonight in this situation of movement building and of a global response to our current moment. So that's one. And the other one is that Antoinette alluded to that. I looked it up today. In fact, you have been sitting and holding daily meditation sessions for the entire period, the last 6 weeks, exactly the time that we have been also engaged in GAIA. So
synchronicity.
It is really a sibling. So these are really twin projects.
Yeah, why are we not surprised, Otto?
That were born in the same moment and held so much by the same intention. So it is such a blessing for us to have you with us, particularly in this moment. So May 8th, which is kind of Victory Day Europe, so the day where in Europe the Second World War ended 75 years ago. It was also the year you were born. And so it was an important punctuation of history. And today we all feel we are yet at another punctuation, and maybe it is even, you mentioned that before, it may be even more important this time around. So I want to invite you into our conversation just to share with us a little bit maybe what you saw kind of in the sculpture ones and sculpture twos and the responses kind of and also what you're noticing here in this community and what you're noticing in the community you are holding, which is very much, held with the same intention kind of, and, dealing with the same deeper issues, and what your thoughts are, and, about what is different. So what, 75 years ago, what was the significance kind of that moment? And what is the moment we are living in today? What is ending today? What is wanting to be born today?
Well, let me just start off, Otto, by thanking you for all those kind words and saying that, I would not be here if it weren't for my profound love and respect for you. We've been on parallel tracks for a very long time, and I really, I'm deeply touched just in the time that I've been sitting here and experiencing the lateness of, you've been going for 10 hours, and the vitality of what's been presented and invited into the fore. And inwardly, I was just going, yes, because I tried to protect my time really carefully for all sorts of reasons. And this feels like really important to have said yes to. So as you know, and anybody who is listen to me talk, I mean, I really feel that what you and I are doing is exactly the same thing. I mean, exactly the same thing. And for whatever our ultimate intention is for it to do the work that it needs to do in the world to basically re-regulate the world into some domain of greater well-being and sanity in the face of colossal challenges. The pandemic pales in terms of total impact ultimately to the damage to the climate that we're going to do in the next 100 years. And the amount of suffering and death that will come along with that, and the horrific difference between the privileged, wealthy few with all the power and everybody else on the planet, which is basically the whole species and every other species. So there's a certain kind of cynicism at foot here, a toxic cynicism that is institutionalized and legalized in very many ways that people don't actually realize. Even the people who are part of it don't realize that there's some larger context that has been created by the human mind, driven by a certain kind of impulse to maximize what, capitalists would call profit, whatever that is. More for me, more power, more influence, more control over everything. And very often not paying any attention, since you brought up the fundamental importance of paying attention, not paying any attention to the downstream consequences, ironically, even for those people who are often called, leaders or masters of the universe to their children and grandchildren and, issue, so to speak. And so I think we're at a time on the planet where the pandemic, such as it is at this moment, which is truly horrible, and the amount of death, not only that we've seen, but the amount of death we have still to see, and that we're causing, in some sense, ourselves by our own delusion and ignorance around valuing getting back to what was before we deal with what is. And consequently, in some sense, I believe, although nobody can predict the future, setting things up so that we're going to actually impair what everybody most wants, which is to get back to normal. Although normal wasn't really what anybody wanted, except for a very, very small, maybe Mitch McConnell and a very small number of other global, sort of power mongers. And I'm not just talking about the United States, but the United States is the biggest offender in many ways, although there are plenty of other offenders as well. And so the notion of awareness-based social, I won't use the word change, but transformation, is not kind of just a nice idea to keep a whole bunch of us employed and happily talking to ourselves and kumbayaing our way to some kind of good feeling among ourselves. It's like a matter of life and death. Life and death. I didn't say life or death, it's life and death. And it's making use of life before we die to actually live our way fully into what's possible. And I believe, although we use very different languages and come at it from very different modeling systems and so forth, I believe that there are actually different streams feeding into each other, just the way snowmelt at the top of a mountain, Everest or any mountain, it finds its own way down the mountain, and it's never one way. That if the melting water runs into an obstacle on the mountain, it's not a problem because it can just flow around a rock or whatever. And even dams give way when they shouldn't be there in the first place. So there's a certain power to human intentionality, and you mentioned and coupled together attention and intention in a way that, of course, Husserl and Merleau-Ponty and the phenomenologists and now neurophenomenologists and so forth have known for a long time, but it has not been instantiated in a way where your mother and my mother, if they're alive, which my mother isn't, would not only find accessible, but so compelling that they would say things like, as many people have told me about their parents, why the hell didn't you tell me that meditation was about paying attention? I would have started when I was a teenager. And so we have, in many ways, sort of not fully recognized what it means to be human. And we have not instantiated that enough in our educational system, so that mostly we're about learning what other people think and feel and built, as opposed to how am I in relationship to this moment, my own body, embodied presence or presencing, things that like are a basic curriculum. We don't know what to teach people now about how to function effectively 20 years from now in school, because the world will be so different in 20 years. There's simply no way of knowing that. But we will absolutely need how to inhabit our own skin, how to deal with the vagaries of our own out of control minds, and how to deal with circumstances that challenge everything we most value without losing our minds when we most need to not only regain and preserve them, but to actually understand the full potential of the human mind. And that's really what the meditative traditions have been about for thousands of years. So this is not something some people actually I've read it in the newspapers that Jon Kabat-Zinn invented mindfulness in 1979, I'm not kidding you. So the level of ignorance around this is absolutely huge. And so just for those of you who are listening in, mindfulness is often spoken of as the heart of Buddhist meditation, but it antedates Buddhism by thousands of years. If you know anything about Taoism or, the Vedanta and the kind of Indian, history and practices of the Indian subcontinent, this is kind of the domain of being has not gotten enough attention in the curriculum, in the human curriculum, so to speak. And what we tend to value is the products of doing. But the products of doing are no better than the quality of the being that goes into it, because that's where the insight and creativity come from. And we go, oh my God, Leonardo da Vinci, I mean, both the first scientist and, the most amazing artist. There's an element of mystery here that is absolutely profound about what humans are, who we are, what we are. And my feeling is at this particular juncture on the planet, never mind the pandemic, just what Yuval Noah Harari is saying about Homo sapiens being at a certain point at an inflection point, and now we're going to move into Homo Deus, where, all those people who, the anti-evolutionists who talk about what's it called? Intentional design, or what's the phrase?
Something like that, yeah.
Is the creationists talk about like intelligent design, okay? But evolution has not been intelligent design, as he points out. It's been random, and the randomness coupled with about 3 billion years and all the earlier pre-life conditions on planet Earth at just the right Goldilocks distance from the sun has given rise to the GAIA Journey and a whole bunch of other stuff. So far, that's all been the product of randomness, including how it happens that my father happened to meet my mother and your mother happened to meet your father, and all that stuff is like, if they were sick that day or had a bad headache, you might not exist. And so, but now with biotechnology and nanotechnology and artificial intelligence, the possibility is very, very real that we are going to start doing intelligent design of us and maybe design smarter people. Why not design smarter people? I mean, we all wear glasses after a certain age, or at least many of us do. And we would be really not in such good shape without glasses. So why not a memory upgrade? And why wear it outside the body when you could have it inside the body? All these kinds of things would have been science fiction even 30 years ago. Now they're not. And so we're at an inflection point on a lot of different levels in terms of humanity. And my basic battle cry, you might say, is, hey, before we give up being human, before we give up our analog selves for some digital cyborg, who knows what, or download ourselves to a disk so that we'll be immortal, and never mind this sheath of the body, it's hopeless sheath of pain and agony, anguish. Before we give up being human, maybe we need to discover what it truly, truly means to be fully human. And this is where mindfulness comes in. This is where what the Buddhists would call dharma, a lawfulness of nature that the Buddha discovered, being more like a doctor and a physician than a wise person in a certain way or a guru, and investigated in his own experience long before fMRIs and stuff like that. What is the nature of suffering, human suffering? What is the root cause of the human suffering? And what is the nature of the mind, the analog human mind? He wouldn't have known the word analog. given that evolution has given us under the sort of vault of our skull, the most complex arrangement of matter in the known universe, with, at last count, apparently 86 billion neurons, at least that number of glial cells that no one knows what they're really doing in there, but they can't be there by accident. And out of those 86 billion neurons, which of course feed into the entirety of the body, so there's no separation between brain and body, almost unimaginable thousands of trillions of synaptic connections, and it's not fixed. It's like continually morphing on the basis of experience, mostly in childhood as we grow and acquire language, depending on where we're living, and other kinds of capacities. But it never fully stops growing. And it turns out that we're laying down new neurons in certain regions of the brain, really until the day we die. And not just that, but shaping the synaptic connectivity, what we call functional connectivity, on the basis of exercising certain mental muscles, attention being the primary one, and then apprehension in the sense of realization of what it is that one is attending, and the profound interconnectedness of it. And that's, of course, scientists have been doing that forever, because it's only by apprehending everything that you know with whatever lenses you have to know it, chemical, physics, chemistry, molecular biology, but then taking it as far as the known takes itself, and then resting in the not knowing. Because otherwise, you can't have the next insight. And what science lives on is insight into what is possible given what we already know. And in order to do that, you have to make a lot of space. You have to trust in emergence. You have to trust in not knowing, and actually be the knowing that your awareness and your awareness of your not knowing really is. And so that's not a philosophy or a catechism or a good idea. It's a way of being with I would say with a capital W. And so the more you exercise the muscle that makes that come to life and become our default mode, so to speak, of the complexity in here, then we're beginning to befriend ourselves in ways that are not narcissistic, but actually kind of liberative, because it allows us to be who we always were in the first place, and not be completely imprisoned by our thoughts, our fears, our anger, our reactivity, or our most toxic sense of inadequacy, or I'm the master of the universe and everybody better get out of my way or do my bidding. And, on a small level, we all think we're the master of our universe, at least, and we want to be, and often cause the most harm to the people we love the most. And whoops, how did that happen? What happened there? So much love and 50-60% divorce rate. Tremendous anguish around, children, and often a huge amount of cruelty towards children by the people who gave birth to them and loved them and everything else. So I won't go into a catalog of the diagnosis of the state of the world at this particular moment, but simply say that this is cultivating the domain of being, and then letting action and social action, not just, I'm a isolated Buddha sitting in my temple or on my mountaintop and to hell with the rest of the world, but a deep sense of responsibility for every other creature, and out of a profound experience. I use the word realization, but it only comes out of experiencing interconnectedness. And that's something that we experience with the instrument. This being, I'm pounding my chest, but the instrument is not body, not mind, not heart, whatever soul means or anything like that. It's humanity expressing in these little isolated, but not so isolated because of profound interconnectedness, bubbles called human lifetimes, called our own skin. And so it's a practice. A practice of mindfulness is a way of being. And the real meditation practice is life itself. It's not like a particular kind of exercise. And so those movement exercises, they are actually, I would say, in my framework, they're meditations. What am I feeling when I give myself over to despair, contraction, a sense of being resisted, whether it's external, internal. And you can see that because what we're really looking at is embodiment of mental states. And mindfulness is all about embodiment, but it's the embodiment of liberation from all mental states, pleasant ones, neutral ones, and unpleasant or toxic ones. So that liberation is equivalent to wisdom because then you're not attached to this or that, like I prefer this to that. Of course, we prefer certain things to other things, but very often that preference can blind us to the pain and suffering of others who are not like ourselves. And then injustice arises, and then we institutionalize it and build laws around it to prevent those people from getting what I have. So I won't go on, but just to say that your presencing efforts, institute, and this attempt to bring awareness into the domain of enacted, embodied, social, transformative healing is, I think, in some way, the only thing worth doing on this planet. And there are at this particular moment in time, and there are an infinite number of ways that it could emerge. And what I want to say, or perhaps one contribution that I might make, is to say that it has to start with individuals, that we have to not sort of be so selfless that we don't pay attention to our own suffering and our own pain, but not in a kind of self-centered, self-preoccupied, narcissistic way. And a lot of time, if you start to investigate, even if you would deny any of that, turns out, yeah, you fucking feel like you're the center of the universe. And a lot of the time you act that way. We all do. So it has to be modest. It can't be like sort of some ideology that we buy into. It has to be based on humility, on the sense of like, yeah, this is part of the nature of the mind, is that it's not so easy to get out from under our own ego trip around the narrative of me being the center of the universe. And we don't have to, because if I'm the center of the universe, great, but so is everybody else the center of the universe. So we have an interesting universe that actually doesn't have any center at all, which is exactly what the cosmologists are telling us about the nature of space. That there's no center, there's no periphery. Now you investigate your own awareness just by dropping in for a moment or two and see if you can find the center of your own awareness. And even to call it your own is silly, and see if you can find the boundary of it, the periphery, the circumference of your own awareness. And you'll find, since you were born, you have this hidden dimension of experience that you rely on every day, but never ever notice and never cultivate access to. You can't improve on your awareness because there's no improving on awareness. It's a gift to us, but lots of things get in the way of accessing it. So what we're cultivating in meditative awareness or mindfulness practice, however we're practicing, is access to that, what I call orthogonal dimension of being human, that has an intelligence that unifies, as Wordsworth put it in the Preludes, discordant elements and makes them move in one society. In other words, actually integrated human being. And then you can't be integrated without being deeply connected, because that's the nature of being human. Is we're social animals. We even have mirror neurons that respond when other people move their body in particular ways. And that's thought to be one element of how we come up with empathy. So I'll stop here because I want this to be a dialogue, not a monologue. And I especially want it to be playful, because it's very important. And this is the last thing I'll say about it. Mindfulness is so serious, and the circumstances we're in are so dire and so serious, that it's really important not to take it too seriously. And I'm serious about that.
Thank you, Jon. First of all, I would like to create space for others to also join the conversation. If you want to bring in your question, you can do that via the chat. There may be also later people kind of through the raised hand functions that we want to bring later into the conversation. And Jon, I mean, there's so many things you evoke kind of in what you said. One of them is when you talked about the various rivers coming together, forming a larger stream, right? I think that's definitely something that we are experiencing. I think you experienced that in your work as well. And it also reminded me of something you said earlier today when you were leading your meditation session. There was something along these lines, what you thought that what you mentioned that I also found very evocative. So I will read that sentence from you. I think we are in the very early stages of a revolution of consciousness that will invite all sorts of different kind of lineages and historical traditions to contribute to a profound global renaissance that will put the European Renaissance of 400 years ago into the shade.
I did say that.
Could you elaborate on that?
Well, as my understanding is that the Renaissance emerged from what is called the Dark Ages, where actually weren't so dark and a lot of very interesting stuff was going on. But one of the things that actually liberated what we call the Renaissance was a kind of shift in the relationship of God to man being humans. That all of a sudden, whether it was in art or whether it was in music or whether it, in every domain, a certain kind of three-dimensional element of humanity was realized. And especially in art, it went from being kind of two-dimensional to three-dimensional all of a sudden. And it transmitted a certain kind of a mention of emotion that was always kind of stylized in the past, whether it was, Madonna and Child or anything else. And people started to build edifices of great human beauty and architectural ingenuity, like the dome of the cathedral in Florence, and things that were almost like not thought to be possible. But then people started to investigate the power of human imagination and insight and vision, and then maybe even you could augment that vision by crafting lenses, as Leeuwenhoek did, and discovered there's a whole universe down there in every drop of pond water. And then maybe you could turn a telescope, which was also lenses, through a tube, and you could turn it on Jupiter and discover, hey, there's some things going around Jupiter. Oh my God, we're not the center of the universe. This is like profound. Well, there are all sorts of reasons to think we are at a moment like that now that is even more profound. In part, I alluded to it before because it's like maybe the singularity that people are talking about, where because of our understanding of the digital world, Benjamin Franklin was flying a kite to figure out something about electricity. That was only a couple hundred years ago. And now we're talking in a virtual space because of Benjamin Franklin's, sort of electricity. I mean, if the lights go out, we're not together. This whole virtual thing would completely evaporate without electricity. Physicists were necessary to understand that. Engineers were necessary to bring it into our homes and modulate it and create it. And that's only one of an infinite number of ways in which the Renaissance, the first Renaissance, brought science into the fore, as well as artistic, humanistic expression, and put humans at the center of things, including Dante, in the context, the larger context of, religion and God, but still. So now we have like infinite potential to let the beauty of all architecture, science, art, uh, politics, even statespersonship, justice embodied, not merely embodied in sculptures. It's blind in sculptures, but not in the White House or in the Justice Department. So, this isn't kidding around, and the dark forces are really dark, which is why I'm talking about a renaissance, that we need something that's equally not light and the opposite, but profoundly illuminating, that's always been possible, but now presents an opportunity that if we miss it, we may never get another opportunity. Because let's face it, a lot of this stuff is driven, capitalism, for instance, neoliberal capitalism, driven by greed. It's like, okay, if the planet's going to burn up, let's make as much money before we all die. And then maybe we'll have a bigger boat to, deal with the fact that New York City will be underwater. And what about all those people who like grow the food and bring you the food and everything else? We'll figure it out later. But as long as we have a big enough bank account, probably we'll be able to sucker somebody into being our servants. I don't think that model is just going to work anymore. That it's like, and I've said this on my broadcast any number of times, that if the human body were designed in such a way that say the heart and the liver went to war over, they didn't like how the color of each other's cells, and they felt like, hey, the liver says like I conduct over 300,000 enzymatic reactions a second to keep you alive, and all you do is pump like a stupid pump, so the heart and the liver go to war with each other. The whole organism not going to benefit from that. And if the brain gets involved and say, no, we are the most complex, and look at our synapses and how beautiful we are, and we can stretch from the head to the toe and all of that, it's like insane. So if we're thinking about that as a kind of analogy to body politic, if one half of the country goes to war with the other half of the country, and they talk about civil war in the United States and things like that, out of this kind of fear, hatred, delusion, this is exactly what the Buddha was talking about 2,500 years ago. And we need to eat. We need to eat and digest, metabolize our own greed, hatred, and delusion. And we need it right in our faces, because the delusion that we have given rise to collectively, while I don't really feel like it's useful to talk about evil, I far prefer to talk about ignorance. The consequences of the kind of income inequality, extreme in that way, and racial profiling and separation and injustice in all sorts of kinds of ways, and global ecological injustice, these things all are so toxic that it's like they're the diseases of the planet. It's like our species is the autoimmune disease of the planet. We're both the vector of it and the first victim of it. And we can't afford to do that anymore. So we need to wake up. If we know what the glaciers are doing, not because we see it inwardly when we meditate, but because we can photograph it from satellites over a period of 30 years and see like they're disappearing, we need to be mindful that the glaciers are disappearing. We need to be mindful of what happens if Antarctic, the ice sheet calves into the Southern Ocean, in terms of, there's just an endless category of things that we have not been paying enough attention to, that a lot of people feel are just a hoax. So I think it's time for the Renaissance. It's time for waking up. And it's time for us to no longer get into ussing and theming anymore and finding like they're the enemy. They you know, if it's too important to make it personal, that ignorance is a distributive function, just the way wisdom is a distributive function. Everybody's got the same potential for it. And a lot of the karmic reasons that people get stuck in greed and delusion are fear of actually facing themselves, fear of being at the bottom of your uh, Otto, they just do not want to take that deep a look. But that's partly because they are so scarred by never having been recognized for who they were from the moment they were born, or perhaps before that. And so we need to, in some sense, find inclusive ways to have everybody be who they really are, and then they will stop trying to cause harm to others because they need to protect themselves in ways that are extremely damaging to everybody else in the environment. I think that's a potential, and the people in government are doing it now. I mean, the Green New Deal and things like that. But there's sort of micro credit and all sorts of things that have elevated women and done all sorts of incredible things in various countries. I'm thinking about Bangladesh and so forth. So this is all mindfulness. It's not like mindfulness is life itself, and awareness has no limits. It's boundless, again, like the universe, or the multiverse. It's got a lot of different dimensions to it. And we need to stay with the realization of interconnectedness and the realization of what the Buddhists would call the emptiness of self, which we don't have to go into except to say, whoever you think you are, that's not who you are. Because thinking is very limited. You're much more than your narrative. And the challenge is not to create even a better narrative, but to drop all narratives and let who you actually are emerge, flourish, and then, to use Francisco Varela's word, enact what is realized inwardly and together in the service of minimizing harm and maximizing well-being. So the last thing I'll say, since we started out talking about MBSR and medicine, is that in medicine, there's a Hippocratic Oath, and the first line of the Hippocratic Oath is primum non nocere, first do no harm. And medicine, of course, causes a lot of harm. And we can go into all sorts of examples of that. When medicine doesn't really stay in alignment with its deepest roots, then it too can cause harm, because we can all be mindless. But maybe we need a Hippocratic Oath for politics. Maybe we need a Hippocratic Oath for business, for corporations. Maybe there needs to be a complete look at what is good about capitalism and what is destructive about capitalism, and actually instantiate laws that regulate greed and make certain levels of greed like, well, you can play that game as much as you want, but you have to give 90% of it back. That's not pie in the sky thinking. That was the law under Eisenhower.
Thank you for opening this more kind of collective and societal space of mindfulness and awareness. And I think what we are experiencing here is also influenced by the field we are living in here in the United States, because everything being described is a global phenomenon, and it's particularly painfully visible and felt right now, right here.
But also in Hungary, in the Philippines, I mean, in Brazil, I mean, there's no end to the list of Trump acolytes who are really causing tremendous suffering, really globally, in many, many different domains. And so humanity and civilization itself, not Western civilization, but all civilization, is really hangs in the balance.
And we are kind of, this session, John, is really kind of the midpoint of our Gaia journey, right? So we have been,
Yeah.
leaning into and sensing into these, into our collective condition, and our local conditions, and as we move into the second part of the cycle, we also really want to put our attention there where our intention is, kind of, so what we want to bring into reality more fully. So I
Yeah.
wonder whether you could take us into through a practice, kind of, for the remaining time that we have, so that maybe through this kind of, and the view of everything said in this session and in the earlier sessions, that would allow us maybe to align and realign our attention and intention in the context of that, what it is that we want to bring into reality more fully.
In 10 minutes. So I would invite you to adopt a posture, whatever the time zone you're in, however late it is at night or early in the morning or whatever, to adopt a posture that for you in this moment embodies wakefulness and dignity. Because in doing that, there you have the whole thing about the body. When you intend to embody wakefulness and dignity, you invite it. And you also recognize that it's not an add-on, it's intrinsic, and you're simply inviting it to appear more in awareness as opposed to being lost in some conceptual realm. So you're nurturing whatever you're attending to and whatever you're inviting into the field of awareness. And wakefulness and dignity have an enormous amount of generative energy behind them. Creativity, imagination. And when we get out from under our small narratives of selfing, then we tap into this kind of profound transformational and healing qualities that are completely integrated into our very being. And so we can exercise the muscle or tune the instrument, is another metaphor of awareness, by paying attention on purpose in the present moment as much as possible non-judgmentally, which doesn't mean we won't have judgments. It means that we'll suspend judging how much judgments do arise: liking, disliking, wanting, pushing away, running from, pursuing. And in all meditative traditions, there are two very, very basic elements that help us to inhabit this space of awareness. And because it's boundless and there's no center and no periphery, and because it's right under our noses all the time, often we don't recognize it at all. We don't know what it means when we're invited to rest in awareness, for instance. So in all meditative traditions, it's always helpful to have an anchor for your attention, and what we call an object of attention. And the most convenient one, and the one that's mostly used in all meditative traditions, is the breath sensations in the body, because for obvious reasons, you can't leave home without it. It's going 24/7. And it's intimately tied to our mental states. If we get anxious, we might hold our breath. If we get really frightened, our breath might be really very rapid. If we get angry, I mean, every emotion actually expresses itself in the breath. And no two breaths are the same. We may take hundreds of thousands or millions of breaths during a lifetime. No two are the same. just like no snowflakes are the same. And so can we simply be with this breath coming in and this breath leaving the body and feeling it wherever it's most vivid in the body? And then, of course, I have to do a lot of talking to invite you to this point, but this is something that you don't need anyone to tell you because you're already breathing. The question is, can you know it non-conceptually by inviting yourself to simply ride on the waves of this breath coming in with full awareness? And that means feeling the breath sensations in the body, wherever they are most vivid. Riding on the wave of the out-breath, almost as if you're surfing or floating in a rubber raft that's rising up with the gentle lapping waves of the lake or ocean and then dropping you back down. And you're just floating on the waves of your own breath. But it's not the breath that we're interested in here. It's the attending to the breath, which is the gateway to your awareness, which is never not here. And so your experience is actually coming into awareness, coming to you. And all you need to do is open, receive it, and rest in this timeless present moment we call now. And if we had more time, I might stop talking and you could simply rest here for 20 or 30 minutes. By the clock, that would be an infinite number of moments in terms of the reality of life unfolding. And whatever arises, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, it's all the curriculum. So there's nothing that is a problem. We can put the welcome mat out for all of it. And then, of course, we'll get sorely distracted and carried away by our thoughts. So we have to be very generous and kind to ourselves. And every time you notice your mind is not in the raft or on the surfboard or with this in-breath or out-breath, just notice what's on your mind. That's a whole other learning process and curriculum because there's lots of stuff on our mind. And it's usually cyclical and it comes back and back and back and back. Same stuff over and over and over again and takes us nowhere. But attending to it is liberating. But since the breath is just an object of attention, the real attending, the real invitation is to simply rest in the attending itself and be the knowing. One way to put it is to be the knowing and the not knowing that your awareness already is. Because you can't, pay attention without it immediately inviting awareness to be your default mode for this moment. And then over time, the more you practice, the more you exercise the muscle, not trying to get anywhere else or get to some special state because there's no special state to get to. The special state is right here because you're insanely special. When you stop thinking of yourself as insanely special. And then you can simply let go of any object, the breath or any other object of attention, and simply rest in awareness itself. Or sometimes I use the present participle, awarenessing. And so giving yourself over in these final moments together to resting in the boundless spaciousness of your own awareness. Feeling how it is in the body. I'm using language here, and that's definitely going to be slightly dualistic, how it is in the heart, how it is in the mind, and how it is in the social field of all of us here together, And in fact, the social field of humanity emerging at this particular moment, dealing with everything we're dealing with in this pandemic, and really the full catastrophe, if you will, of the human condition, much of which we've brought about by our own, and I say this very instrumentally, industriousness, the industrial revolution. Whether it's the first, the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, according to Davos language, World Economic Forum language. What we need is actually an orthogonal revolution, so that we don't become slaves of our own industriousness and post-industriousness and postmodern obsessiveness. And in particular, our greediest, most toxic, most othering-based, and most deluded tendencies to put ourselves first and disregard interconnectedness. And so this is a place to rest, to experience profound rest and immediate freedom. Not like, oh, I'll meditate for 60 years and then I'll get someplace, I'll be enlightened. Maybe it's good to a first approximation, maybe throw out the idea that there are enlightened people and that you really want to be one too, but rather shift it so that to a first approximation, maybe there are only enlightening moments, and they're everywhere and possible at any moment, because every moment, if you're present for it, is the only moment. And if you want the future to be different, whether it's social activism, which is absolutely necessary, or social, organizational, whatever you want to call it, it has to come out of this deep, profound, liberative sense of wholeness, of being whole ourselves and part of larger and larger and larger circles of wholeness that ultimately extend even beyond the planet, to atoms and electrons, and how, the stuff of our bodies and the stuff of our neurons and all of that stuff, that came out of exploding supernovas, if not the hydrogen of the Big Bang, is the universe manifesting itself in consciousness. Yeah, it took, 13.8 billion years to get to this point, but here we are. So how are we going to be with it? And what are we going to do with it? And if our doing can come out of being, alone and together, well, that's an adventure, a love affair that I, for one, being a father and a grandfather and caring about life going forward way beyond me, feel is worth taking. And it unfolds moment by moment, by timeless moment. So if anything I've said has been meaningful to you, even in the slightest little way, let me just give you one homework assignment, which is tomorrow morning when you wake up, don't jump out of bed. See if you can get in touch with your body, lying in bed, and feel just your breathing just the way we did now. Feel your body just the way we did now. And ask yourself, am I awake yet? And if you're not, wake up before you get out of bed. Thanks, folks. I really appreciate, Otto, the opportunity to participate in this collective adventure of a lifetime, and to really share, in your genius and your energies and the impact that you're having in the world. And I just may it be, through, of course, the younger generations and all the people on this call and everybody else that's been affected by you and all your colleagues over the years. I mean, may it nurture people in the most profound ways.
Thank you, Jon, for your presence, for your reflections, for taking us through this practice, and also for the homework that we will engage in. And
I hope so. You can do it every morning.
for the close, and the visual resonance, I turn it over to Antoinette and Kelvy.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
I'll stay until you close it out.
Thank you, Jon. Thank you, Otto. What a beautiful, beautiful conversation and practice to take us through. Really powerful in the waking up moment that we're sitting in. We'll move to Kelvy, who has been being with the wall and really moving through a generative scribing practice. So Kelvy, would you like to share anything with us as we take a look?
Sorry. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
So the only thing that I really want to chime in is this is something that it started two drawings ago, and then I built into it, and it actually builds into a drawing that was started, the black was started 2 years ago. And so the sense of waking up for me is something that we've been engaged in for years together. Those who are joining the call for the first time, those who are on the team, Jon, many others. And I'm really rooted in that a longer sense of time and what we're doing in the greater unfolding of things. And the only other thing that comes to mind is so I've been alone. I don't have any companions of any living form with me through this isolation, but I started putting out bird seed on my deck, and so I've been drawing birds in, and their feathers, how they catch the light, is something that I've been sitting with. And Jon's words around waking up, all I can think of is that it's the time for our feathers to catch the light, and so that we can fly as a species in some way. So that's really all that's sitting with me. I'll turn it back.
Thank you, Kelvy. Beautiful. So actually, we'll stay on the image for a moment, and we've been doing this at the end of every practice, which is or every session, to stay with this image and really take in the whole of it. Just noticing what we're seeing, what we're sensing from this awakened state, and what Kelvy has just shared from the conversation we had and the journey that we're on now. And we can capture some of our thoughts in the chat boxes with the prompts I see, I sense, or I feel. And just noticing what comes up for you here. I see, I sense, I feel. see depth. I see transformation. I sense the power of our individual and collective willingness to generate what we need. I see when systems fail, people rise alongside an ephemeral figure. I see the possibility of freedom from the inside out. I see darkness and I feel the light. I see a human standing tall. I feel connection. I sense remembrance. I see the wisdom contained so many beautiful statements here. Thank you. Thank you all. And thank you, Kelvy, for this incredible capture of time and energy and dialogue. Really lovely. Thank you. And as we close, I feel like this conversation is still just a beginning. This conversation is beginning to open us and move us into this wakeful state. And that is what we need now. So thank you all for being on this journey with us, journey together. And I'll share a few more thank yous to our team and also to the translators who have done so much work to be able to bring what we're doing here in this moment out in many different languages. And thank you to Ricardo also, who created the video of all the images that were shared. We will continue the conversation online with hashtag GAIA Journey and on GaiaJourney.org, where we have an essentials place where you can drop in and check out the clips and see some of the pieces that we've been talking about throughout the journey, and see our guests, clips of our guests there as well. So you can head over to GaiaJourney.org or hashtag GaiaJourney, as you can see. And as we move forward, what I want to share is actually just what Jon just shared at the end here, with the rhythm of the inhale and the exhale, the ability that we have to come back to the breath. That is the essence of this journey that we're on together. It's the ability to come back to that. That is what will get us through this time and into the next phase of what is needed now. So thank you for the homework, Jon. And to all of us, that will be our work for this coming, we'll move into an exhale week. And that will be our work with our social solidarity circles as we start to think about our hubs and the topic areas that we are most called to. And as we continue to practice for ourselves, with ourselves, and for each other. So we will continue to do that, and we'll see you in all of the spaces and places. A deep, deep thank you. Jon, thank you so much for being here. Otto, thank you for holding. Everyone, thank you so much for holding this space, and we will continue the conversation and truly look forward to hearing from you, your thoughts, and all of your next steps. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day, evening, morning.
Bye. Thank you very much for the moment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.